Sarah Chen had babysat for the Hendersons exactly 47 times, and never once had little Tommy stayed up past 9 o'clock without consequences. Tonight, however, as she stood in the kitchen of their suburban home, staring at the clock that read 9:47 p.m., she realized something fundamental about the universe had shifted. Tommy wasn't just awake. He was sitting calmly at the kitchen table, drawing pictures with crayons, completely unbothered by the fact that he should have been asleep nearly an hour ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What made this particularly strange wasn't Tommy's defiance of bedtime. Sarah had dealt with stubborn kids before. What made her pause, crayon box in hand, was the absolute silence outside. Not the normal quiet of a Tuesday evening in Millfield Heights, but a silence so complete it felt like the world had been wrapped in cotton. No cars driving past, no dogs barking in neighboring yards, no distant hum of the highway that usually provided background noise even at night. Even the old refrigerator that normally hummed and clicked had gone completely silent. Sarah walked to the living room window and peered through the blinds. The street lights were on, casting their usual orange glow across the empty sidewalks, but something felt wrong about the scene. She couldn't quite put her finger on what it was until she realized what was missing: shadows. The light from the street lamps seemed to end abruptly at the edge of their pools of illumination, rather than gradually fading into darkness. It was as if someone had painted the night in stark contrasts, with no gradual transitions between light and dark. Sarah returned to the kitchen where Tommy continued his artwork, tongue poking out slightly in concentration. She glanced at his drawing and felt a chill run down her spine. The 6-year-old had drawn what appeared to be the Henderson house, but surrounding it were tall, dark figures with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to follow her, even though they were just crayon marks on paper. "Tommy, sweetie, what are you drawing?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice light and casual. Tommy looked up at her with his bright green eyes, the same eyes that had sparkled with mischief during their previous babysitting sessions. Tonight, however, there was something different about his expression. He seemed older somehow, more serious than any 6-year-old should be. "The protectors," Tommy said matter-of-factly, as if this explanation should make perfect sense. "They come when the hungry ones get too close, but they only come when someone's really, really mad about bedtime." Sarah blinked, processing this statement. In all her years of babysitting, she had heard children say strange things. Kids had active imaginations, especially at bedtime when they were tired and sometimes a little scared. But something about Tommy's tone made her believe he wasn't making up a story. He spoke with the confidence of someone sharing factual information. "The hungry ones?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from Tommy. She had learned that the best way to understand children was to meet them on their level and ask genuine questions about their ideas. Tommy nodded solemnly and picked up a black crayon. He began adding more details to his drawing, creating shapes that hurt Sarah's eyes to look at directly. The forms seemed to shift and writhe, even though she knew they were just static marks on paper. "They live in the spaces between spaces," Tommy explained as he colored. "They're always hungry for dreams and thoughts, and the warm, fuzzy feelings that make people happy. But they can't come into our world unless certain rules get broken." Sarah felt her rational mind trying to dismiss this as childhood fantasy, but something about the perfect silence outside and the strange quality of the light made her keep listening. She had always prided herself on being a logical person. She was studying biochemistry at the State University, planning to pursue medical school after graduation. She believed in facts and evidence and scientific explanations for natural phenomena. But tonight, sitting in the Henderson kitchen with a 6-year-old who spoke about interdimensional entities with casual certainty, she found herself questioning those beliefs. "What kind of rules?" Sarah asked. Tommy looked up from his drawing, studying Sarah's face carefully before answering. "Time rules," he said finally. "Sleep rules. The rules that keep the days separate from the night and the awake separate from the dreaming. When someone's supposed to be asleep but they're not, and when someone's supposed to be taking care of them gets really upset about it, sometimes the boundaries get thin." As if summoned by his words, a sound drifted through the silence outside. It was barely audible at first, like wind through leaves, but gradually grew louder and more distinct. Sarah realized it wasn't wind at all. It was breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that seemed to come from something much larger than any person or animal she could imagine. Sarah stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. The sound was so loud in the absolute silence that it made her jump. She moved to the window above the kitchen sink and looked out into the Hendersons' backyard. The neat lawn and carefully tended flower beds looked normal enough, but at the edge of the property, where the yard met the line of oak trees that separated the Henderson house from the neighbors, she could see movement. At first, she thought it might be the wind rustling the branches, but there was no wind. The movement was too deliberate, too purposeful. Something was walking through the trees, something tall enough that its movement caused the upper branches to sway. As Sarah watched, frozen with a mixture of fascination and terror, a shape emerged from the tree line. The creature that stepped into the backyard defied easy description. It stood at least 12 feet tall, with a form that seemed to be made of shadows given substance. Its limbs were too long and jointed in too many places, moving with a fluid grace that suggested they weren't bound by the same physical laws that governed normal matter. What captured Sarah's attention most, however, were its eyes. Dozens of them, scattered across what might have been its head, all glowing with a soft blue light that reminded her of the bioluminescent creatures she had studied in her marine biology elective. The creature moved across the yard with surprising silence, its movements creating no footprints in the grass despite its obvious size and weight. It approached the house slowly, methodically, as if it was following some predetermined pattern. When it reached the patio outside the kitchen door, it stopped and turned all of its eyes toward the window where Sarah stood watching. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Sarah and the creature regarded each other through the glass. She had the distinct impression that it was studying her, evaluating her in some way that she couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned away and began walking around the perimeter of the house. Sarah backed away from the window, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She turned to warn Tommy, to grab him and run upstairs to hide or call the police or do something rational in response to what was obviously an impossible situation. But when she looked at the kitchen table, Tommy was gone. Panic flooded through her system as she quickly searched the kitchen, checking under the table and behind the counter. "Tommy," she called out, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Tommy, where are you?" "I'm right here, Sarah," came Tommy's voice from the living room. She rushed in to find him standing at the front window, looking out at the street with the same calm expression he had worn while drawing. "Tommy, we need to get away from the windows," Sarah said, reaching for his hand. "There's something outside that—" "I know," Tommy interrupted gently. "There are lots of them now. They always come when the rules get broken. But don't worry, Sarah. The protectors are coming too." Sarah followed Tommy's gaze out the front window and felt her knees go weak. The creature she had seen in the backyard was not alone. The entire street was filled with similar beings, all moving with the same purposeful, silent grace. They varied in size and shape, but all shared the same shadow-like substance and the same clusters of glowing eyes. Some walked on what might have been legs, others seemed to flow across the ground like liquid darkness, and still others moved through the air itself, defying gravity with casual ease. "Tommy," Sarah whispered, "what are they?" "The hungry ones," Tommy replied, still watching the street with fascination rather than fear. "They're always trying to get into our world, but usually the rules keep them out. When I stay up past bedtime and you get upset about it, it makes the boundaries weak. That's when they can come through." Sarah tried to process this information while watching the creatures move through the neighborhood. They seemed to be searching for something, moving from house to house and examining each building carefully. Several of them had gathered around the house across the street, where the Johnsons lived with their newborn baby. Sarah remembered that Mrs. Johnson had mentioned during their last conversation how difficult it had been to get little Emma to sleep through the night. "If staying up past bedtime lets them in," Sarah said slowly, "then you should go to sleep right now. That would fix this, right?" Tommy turned away from the window and looked at Sarah with an expression that was far too mature for his young face. "It's too late for that now," he said. "Once they're through, the rules don't work the same way. But don't worry, the protectors know they're here." As if responding to some unseen signal, the creatures in the street suddenly stopped their searching and turned their attention towards something Sarah couldn't see. Their body language, if it could be called that, suggested alertness and possibly concern. Several of them began moving away from the houses and toward the far end of the street, where the subdivision connected to the main road. That's when Sarah heard it. A new sound cutting through the silence, completely different from the breathing and movement of the shadow creatures. It was the sound of footsteps. Normal, human footsteps walking down the asphalt street with steady, determined rhythm. But there was something about those footsteps that made the giant creatures retreat. "Here they come," Tommy said with satisfaction, climbing onto the couch so he could get a better view out the window. Sarah peered through the blinds and saw a figure walking down the middle of the street. At first glance, it appeared to be a normal person, but as the figure came closer, she could see that wasn't quite right. The person was tall, probably close to 7 feet, and moved with a confidence that seemed to push back the darkness around them. They wore what looked like ordinary clothes, jeans and a sweater, but something about their presence made the shadow creatures keep their distance. The figure stopped in front of the Henderson house and looked directly at the living room window where Sarah and Tommy were watching. Even though she couldn't see the person's face clearly in the dim light, Sarah had the unmistakable feeling that they were being acknowledged. "Is that one of the protectors?" Sarah asked Tommy. "Yep," Tommy replied. "They look like regular people, but they're not. They're what happens when someone gets really, really good at taking care of kids who won't go to sleep. After a while, they become something more." The figure in the street raised one hand in what might have been a wave or a greeting, then continued walking toward the far end of the subdivision. As they moved, the shadow creatures began retreating, flowing back toward whatever spaces between worlds they had emerged from. Within minutes, the street was empty again, though the unnatural silence remained. Sarah sank onto the couch next to Tommy, trying to make sense of what she had just witnessed. Everything she thought she knew about reality had been challenged in the span of less than an hour. She was a science student, someone who believed in rational explanations and evidence-based conclusions. But she had just watched creatures that shouldn't exist retreat from a person who appeared to be more than human. "Tommy," she said carefully, "how do you know about all this? About the hungry ones and the protectors and the rules?" Tommy finished watching the empty street and turned to face her. "Because this happens sometimes," he said simply. "Not a lot, but sometimes. When kids stay up too late and their babysitters get really upset about it, the boundaries get weak and things can come through." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the protectors always come too, because that's what they do. They protect. But why haven't I ever heard about this before? If it happens sometimes, surely other people would know about it. There would be news reports or scientific studies or something. Tommy tilted his head, considering her question. "Would you have believed it if someone told you about it yesterday?" Sarah thought about this and realized he was right. If someone had approached her yesterday and told her about interdimensional creatures that appeared when children defied bedtime, she would have assumed they were either joking or needed professional help. Even now, having witnessed it herself, part of her mind was trying to find rational explanations for what she had seen. "The grown-ups who see it usually decide they imagined it," Tommy continued. "It's easier that way. But babysitters see it more than other people because we're the ones who break the rules." "We?" "Kids and babysitters," Tommy clarified. "We're on the same team, kind of. Kids know about the magic stuff because we haven't learned to ignore it yet. And babysitters know about it because taking care of kids puts you right at the edge where the magic happens." Sarah considered this explanation while looking around the Henderson living room, which now felt like foreign territory, despite her familiarity with every piece of furniture and family photo. So what happens now? Do the hungry ones come back? Do more protectors arrive? "Now the rules are different for a while," Tommy said. "Until morning comes and everything goes back to normal. But for the rest of tonight, as long as you're my babysitter and I'm supposed to be asleep but I'm not, we're in the between space." "The between space?" "The place where the regular rules don't work the same way. Where kids can know things they're not supposed to know, and babysitters can see things they're not supposed to see. It's not dangerous as long as the protectors are watching, but it's different." Sarah felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement at this explanation. The rational part of her mind insisted that she was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. or that there was a logical explanation for everything that had happened. But another part of her, a part she had forgotten existed, recognized the truth in what Tommy was telling her. "How long have you known about this?" she asked. "Since I was really little," Tommy replied. "I think most kids know about it when they're babies, but they forget as they get older. I just remembered longer than most kids do." Sarah thought about her own childhood, trying to recall if she had ever experienced anything similar. Vague memories surfaced of nights when she had been afraid to sleep, not because of monsters under the bed or in the closet, but because of something larger and more mysterious. She remembered her mother finding her awake and upset, telling her that it was important to go to sleep on time because that's when the good dreams come to chase away the bad ones. At the time, she had assumed her mother was simply trying to comfort her with a bedtime story. Now she wondered if there had been more truth to those words than she had realized. "Tommy," Sarah said slowly, "what do the protectors actually do? I saw one of them make the hungry ones go away, but how?" Tommy climbed down from the couch and walked back to the kitchen table where his drawing remained unfinished. He picked up a purple crayon and began adding new figures to his picture, tall forms that stood between the house and the dark creatures. "They keep the balance," he said as he colored. "The hungry ones want to eat all the dreams and thoughts and happy feelings, but the protectors don't let them. They stand guard at the edges of the between space and make sure nothing gets taken that shouldn't be taken." "But where do the protectors come from?" Tommy paused in his coloring and looked up at Sarah with an expression that seemed ancient despite his young features. "They come from people who cared so much about keeping kids safe that they became something more than regular people. Like babysitters who loved their jobs so much that they couldn't stop doing it, even when they grew up." This explanation sent a shiver through Sarah that had nothing to do with fear. She thought about her own dedication to babysitting, how she had started doing it in high school for extra money, but had continued even when her college coursework became demanding. She enjoyed spending time with children, but more than that, she felt a deep responsibility for their well-being that went beyond simple childcare. "Do all babysitters eventually become protectors?" she asked. "No," Tommy said, returning to his drawing. "Only the special ones. The ones who understand that taking care of kids is about more than just making sure they don't get hurt. The ones who know that children are the doorway between the regular world and all the magical stuff." Sarah watched Tommy color for several minutes, processing everything she had learned. The silence outside continued, broken occasionally by distant sounds that might have been normal suburban noises or might have been something else entirely. She found herself listening more carefully than she ever had before, trying to distinguish between the familiar and the unknown. "Tommy," she said finally, "why are you telling me all this? If most grown-ups forget about it or decide they imagined it, why are you explaining it to me?" Tommy set down his crayon and looked at her with the same serious expression he had worn all evening. "Because you're different," he said simply. "Most babysitters just want kids to go to sleep so they can watch TV or do homework. But you actually care about making sure we're okay. And tonight, when the rules got broken and the hungry ones came through, you didn't run away or hide. You wanted to protect me." Sarah realized that Tommy was right. When she had seen the creature in the backyard, her first instinct hadn't been to flee or call for help. It had been to find Tommy and make sure he was safe. Even now, sitting in a living room that had become a gateway to impossible things, her primary concern was for his well-being. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means you're already on the path," Tommy replied. "The path that leads from being a regular person who takes care of kids to being something more. The protectors will be watching you now, to see if you're ready to learn the deeper rules." Before Sarah could ask what the deeper rules were, a new sound began outside. It was subtle at first, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but gradually grew more distinct. The sound was musical, but unlike any music Sarah had ever heard. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, creating harmonies that made her feel both calm and alert. Tommy smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived that evening. "They're singing," he said happily. "The protectors sing when everything is safe again. It means the hungry ones are all the way gone, and the boundaries are getting strong again." Sarah stood up and walked to the front window. The street still appeared empty, but the quality of the darkness had changed. Instead of the harsh contrast between light and shadow that she had noticed earlier, the night now had a gentler, more natural appearance. The streetlights cast their usual pools of illumination, and beyond them, the darkness faded gradually, rather than ending abruptly. The music continued for several more minutes, beautiful and complex in ways that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to some deeper part of her consciousness. It reminded her of lullabies her grandmother had sung when she was very young, songs in a language she didn't recognize but which had always made her feel safe and loved. As the music faded, Sarah became aware that the normal sounds of the neighborhood were returning. She could hear the distant hum of traffic from the highway, the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, and the familiar clicking and humming of the Henderson refrigerator. The world was returning to its normal state. But Sarah knew that she would never experience it the same way again. "Is it over?" she asked Tommy. "For tonight," Tommy replied. "But now you know about it, so you'll probably see it again. Especially if you keep babysitting kids who test the rules." Sarah thought about this prospect and realized she wasn't frightened by it. The experience had been terrifying and overwhelming, but it had also been the most real thing she had ever experienced. The idea of returning to her normal life, where the most exciting thing that happened was studying for organic chemistry exams, suddenly seemed dreadfully boring. "Tommy," she said, "what would happen if I wanted to learn more about all this? About the protectors and the rules and the between space?" Tommy grinned, looking like a normal 6-year-old for the first time all evening. "Then you'd have to babysit more kids who stay up past bedtime," he said. "And you'd have to pay attention to the signs that most grown-ups ignore. And eventually, if you're really meant to be a protector, someone will come to teach you the deeper rules." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty at this prospect. Her rational mind reminded her that she had academic goals and career plans that didn't include chasing interdimensional creatures, or learning mysterious rules from ancient guardians. But another part of her, a part that felt more alive than it had in years, whispered that those plans might not be as important as she had thought. "How will I know if someone comes to teach me?" she asked. "You'll know," Tommy said confidently. "The protectors have ways of finding people who are ready to learn. They've been watching you tonight, and they'll keep watching to see what you do with what you've learned." Sarah looked around the Henderson living room one more time, memorizing every detail of the place where her understanding of reality had been fundamentally altered. Tomorrow, she would have to return to her normal life, attend classes, complete assignments, and interact with people who had no idea that creatures from other dimensions sometimes visited suburban neighborhoods. But she knew that part of her would always be waiting for the next time the rules got broken and the between space opened up. "What time is it?" Tommy asked suddenly. Sarah checked her phone and was surprised to see that it was only 10:15 p.m. The entire experience had felt like it lasted for hours, but less than 30 minutes had actually passed since she had first noticed Tommy's refusal to go to sleep. "It's past your bedtime," she said with a smile. Tommy nodded and yawned, apparently feeling tired for the first time all evening. "I think I'm ready to sleep now," he said. "The between space always makes me sleepy once it closes." Sarah helped Tommy get ready for bed, brushing his teeth and tucking him into his race car sheets, just as she had done 46 times before. But tonight, the routine felt different. She understood now that bedtime wasn't just about rest and proper sleep schedules. It was about maintaining the boundaries between worlds, about keeping the magical and the mundane in their proper places. "Sarah," Tommy said as she was about to turn off his bedroom light. "Yes? Thank you for not running away when the hungry ones came. Most babysitters would have run away." Sarah smiled and smoothed his dark hair away from his forehead. "Thank you for teaching me about the rules," she replied. "Sweet dreams, Tommy." "You too," Tommy said, closing his eyes. "And Sarah, pay attention to your dreams tonight. Sometimes the protectors visit people in their dreams when they want to say something important." Sarah turned off the light and quietly closed Tommy's bedroom door. She returned to the living room and settled on the couch, ostensibly to wait for Mr. and Mrs. Henderson to return from their date night. But in reality, she wanted to process everything that had happened and think about what it might mean for her future. As she sat in the familiar room, surrounded by family photos and children's toys, Sarah reflected on how quickly her entire worldview had been transformed. This morning, she had been a college student studying biochemistry with plans for medical school. Tonight, she was someone who knew about interdimensional creatures and mysterious guardians who protected children from forces beyond normal understanding. The rational part of her mind continued to offer alternative explanations for what she had experienced. Perhaps she had fallen asleep while babysitting and dreamed the entire thing. Perhaps the stress of her upcoming exams had caused her to hallucinate. Perhaps Tommy had an active imagination and had somehow convinced her to see things that weren't really there. But deep in her heart, Sarah knew that what had happened was real. She had crossed a threshold tonight, entered a world where the impossible was not only possible but necessary. She had glimpsed the hidden machinery that kept ordinary reality functioning, the careful balance between order and chaos that most people never suspected existed. More than that, she had discovered something about herself. When faced with genuine danger and impossible circumstances, she hadn't panicked or fled. She had stepped forward, ready to protect a child in her care regardless of what that protection might cost her. According to Tommy, this response marked her as someone with the potential to become something more than an ordinary person. Sarah thought about the protector she had seen walking down the street, moving with such confidence that reality itself seemed to bend around them. The idea that she might someday develop similar abilities was both thrilling and terrifying. What would it mean to become something more than human? What would she have to give up, and what would she gain? Her phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Henderson, letting her know that they would be home in about an hour. Sarah replied that everything was fine, and Tommy had gone to sleep without any problems. As she typed the message, she realized it was technically true. Everything was fine, and Tommy had eventually gone to sleep. She simply hadn't mentioned the interdimensional visitors and mysterious guardians that had made the evening more eventful than usual. Sarah spent the remaining time before the Hendersons returned sitting quietly in their living room, listening to the normal sounds of the neighborhood and thinking about her future. She had always been someone who planned carefully, who made rational decisions based on logical analysis of available options. But tonight had taught her that there were aspects of existence that couldn't be understood through rational analysis alone. When Mr. and Mrs. Henderson returned home, they found Sarah exactly where they expected her to be, sitting on their couch with her textbooks nearby, looking like the responsible college student they had hired to watch their son. They chatted briefly about how the evening had gone, paid her the usual amount, and thanked her for being such a reliable babysitter. As Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of Millfield Heights, she noticed things she had never seen before. Subtle signs that the world was more complex than it appeared on the surface. The way shadows fell at slightly odd angles near certain houses. The fact that some streetlights seemed to cast warmer, more protective light than others. The occasional movement at the edge of her vision that might have been a cat or might have been something else entirely. Most significantly, she noticed that she was no longer afraid of these signs. Instead of making her nervous or uncertain, they filled her with a sense of anticipation. She was beginning to understand that she had been living in a world full of wonders and mysteries, but she had been looking at it with eyes that were trained to see only the ordinary and explicable. That night, Sarah went to sleep thinking about Tommy's prediction that the protectors might visit her dreams. She wasn't sure what form such a visit might take, but she found herself hoping it would happen. She had so many questions about what she had experienced, and she sensed that regular research methods wouldn't provide the answers she needed. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last conscious thought was a recognition that her life had been permanently changed. Tomorrow, she would still have classes to attend and exams to prepare for, but those concerns seemed less important now. She had discovered that there was a hidden world layered beneath the ordinary one, and she wanted to learn everything she could about it. More than that, she had discovered something about herself that she had never suspected. She had the potential to become a guardian, someone who stood between the ordinary world and the forces that would destroy it. The idea was overwhelming and exciting in equal measure, and as sleep claimed her, Sarah smiled with the anticipation of whatever tomorrow might bring. Sarah woke 3 days later to find a woman sitting calmly in her dormitory chair, reading one of her biochemistry textbooks with apparent interest. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing clothes that looked ordinary but somehow seemed to fit too perfectly, as if they had been designed specifically for her body and no one else's. Chapter 12 is fascinating, the woman said without looking up from the textbook. I've always wondered how your species discovered the molecular mechanisms of enzyme catalysis without being able to perceive the quantum fluctuations that actually drive the reactions. Sarah sat up in bed, instantly alert, despite having been deep asleep moments before. Her roommate's bed was empty, which wasn't unusual for a Thursday morning, but Sarah was certain she had locked the door the night before. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" The woman closed the textbook and smiled, her eyes reflecting light in a way that reminded Sarah of deep water. "My name is Elena Martinez, and I got in here because locks are suggestions when you understand how matter really works. As for who I am, I think you already know the answer to that question." Sarah felt a thrill of recognition mixed with apprehension. "You're one of them. One of the protectors." "I am," Elena confirmed, setting the textbook aside and leaning forward slightly. "And you, Sarah Chen, have been doing something interesting since your encounter with young Tommy Henderson. You've been noticing things." It was true. In the 3 days since her night of babysitting had introduced her to the hidden world, Sarah had found herself seeing signs everywhere, patterns in the way certain children behaved that suggested they knew more than they should, subtle wrongness in the behavior of some adults that hinted at recent encounters with things beyond normal experience. Most significantly, she had begun to sense the presence of the protectors themselves, though she had never seen one clearly until now. "I've been trying to understand," Sarah said, pulling her blanket around herself like armor. "I've been researching folklore about supernatural guardians and interdimensional entities, but most of what I find seems like fiction." "Most of it is fiction," Elena agreed. "Truth has a way of becoming legend, and legend has a way of becoming story, and stories have a way of becoming safely fictional. It's better that way for most people. But you're not most people, are you, Sarah?" Sarah thought about the question seriously. 3 days ago, she would have insisted that she was exactly like most people, a normal college student with normal goals and normal problems. But the encounter with Tommy had awakened something in her that felt both new and ancient, as if she was remembering rather than learning. "What makes me different?" Sarah asked. Elena stood up and walked to the dormitory window, looking out at the campus quad where students were hurrying to morning classes. "Tell me, when you were a child, did you ever have the feeling that you were supposed to be doing something important, but you couldn't remember what it was?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had experienced exactly that feeling, starting when she was very young and continuing through her teenage years. A sense of purpose without direction, a certainty that she had a role to play in something larger than herself, but no idea what that role might be. "Yes," Sarah whispered. "How did you know?" "Because that feeling is how the universe marks those who are meant to become protectors," Elena explained, still looking out the window. "Most people are born to live ordinary lives, and there's nothing wrong with that, but a few are born with a deeper calling, a responsibility to stand guard at the boundaries between worlds." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror at this revelation. "But I never chose this. I never asked to be marked for some cosmic responsibility." Elena turned back to face her, and for the first time Sarah could see the weight of years in the woman's eyes. Not physical age, but the accumulation of experiences that went far beyond what any normal human could endure. "None of us chose it initially," Elena said softly. "The calling chooses us. But we do get to choose how we respond to it. Some people feel the calling and ignore it, living normal lives while always feeling slightly hollow, as if they're missing something essential. Others feel it and fight against it, which usually ends badly for everyone involved. And a few feel it and embrace it, discovering that they were meant for something extraordinary." Sarah thought about her life up to this point, how she had always felt as if she was preparing for something without knowing what. Her dedication to her studies, her natural affinity for taking care of children, her tendency to notice details that others missed, All of it suddenly made sense as preparation for a role she was only now beginning to understand. "What exactly do protectors do?" Sarah asked. "Tommy told me you stand guard at the boundaries, but what does that actually mean?" Elena smiled, and for a moment she looked less like an ancient guardian and more like a teacher who was pleased with a student's question. "Reality is more fragile than most people realize. The universe operates according to certain rules, but those rules require constant maintenance. Think of it like the immune system of existence itself. We identify threats to the stability of reality and neutralize them before they can cause widespread damage. Threats like the hungry ones? The hungry ones are just one category of threat," Elena explained. "They represent entropy given consciousness, the desire to unmake rather than create. But there are others, entities that want to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. Parasitic intelligences that feed on the concept of causality itself. Forces that seek to collapse the distinction between what is real and what is possible." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Elena was describing. How can anyone fight against things like that? "By becoming more than human," Elena said simply. "The transformation that creates a protector doesn't just change your body, it changes your relationship with reality itself. You learn to perceive the underlying structure of existence, to interact with the quantum foundations that support everything you think of as normal physics." "Is that what happened to you? You underwent this transformation?" Elena nodded, her expression becoming distant as she recalled memories from long ago. "I was a pediatric nurse in San Francisco, working the night shift at a children's hospital. I kept noticing that certain children who should have been recovering from their illnesses were getting worse, but not in any way that medical science could explain. They were losing something essential, something that had nothing to do with their physical condition." "What were they losing?" "Their connection to the future," Elena said. "Something was feeding on their potential, draining away the possibilities of what they might become. I couldn't prove it, couldn't document it in any way that my colleagues would believe, but I could see it happening, and I couldn't stand by and watch children suffer when I knew there was a cause." Sarah leaned forward, completely absorbed in Elena's story. "What did you do?" "I started staying with them through the night. Not as part of my official duties, but because I felt compelled to. I would sit beside their beds and tell them stories about the future, about all the wonderful things they would do when they grew up, and gradually I began to see the thing that was feeding on them." Elena paused, her eyes unfocused as she remembered. "It was like a shadow with hunger, something that existed in the spaces between moments. It would attach itself to children who were already vulnerable and drain away their hope, their dreams, their sense of possibility. But when I was there, actively reinforcing their connection to the future through stories and presence, it couldn't feed." "So you became a protector by protecting children?" "I became a protector by refusing to accept that there were problems I couldn't solve," Elena corrected. "The transformation happened gradually, over months of fighting something I didn't understand with tools I didn't know I possessed. But eventually, other protectors found me and taught me how to use my abilities properly." Sarah thought about her own experience with Tommy, how she had instinctively moved to protect him despite not understanding what was happening. Is that how it always works? People stumble into situations where they have to act, and that triggers the transformation? "Usually," Elena confirmed. "The universe has a way of presenting challenges to those who are ready for them. Sometimes it's a babysitting job that goes strangely. Sometimes it's a hospital patient who needs something medical science can't provide. Sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time when reality needs someone to stand guard. And if I decide I want to learn more, if I want to understand how to become a protector," Elena's expression became serious, "then your life as you've known it ends. You can't be a biochemistry student planning for medical school and a guardian of interdimensional boundaries at the same time. The responsibilities are too great, and the knowledge you'll need to acquire will change how you think about everything." Sarah felt a sharp pang of loss at the thought of abandoning her academic plans. She had worked hard to get into a good college, had spent years preparing for a career in medicine. The idea of throwing all of that away for something she barely understood seemed insane. "What if I'm not ready to make that choice yet?" Sarah asked. "Then you continue with your normal life," Elena said gently. "The calling doesn't disappear, but it will wait. However, I should warn you that once you've seen behind the curtain of ordinary reality, it becomes very difficult to pretend that what you've seen doesn't matter. Sarah knew Elena was right. Even in the 3 days since her encounter with Tommy, she had found it increasingly difficult to focus on her regular coursework. How could she care about organic chemistry reactions when she knew that there were entities trying to unmake the very concept of chemical bonds? How could she worry about upcoming exams when children all over the world might be facing threats that only people like Elena could address? If I decided to learn, Sarah said slowly, what would that process look like? Elena smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something vast and ageless behind her human appearance. It would begin with you understanding that the rules you've lived by your entire life are just the outermost layer of a much deeper system. You would learn to perceive the quantum substrate that underlies all matter and energy. You would develop the ability to reinforce or modify the local laws of physics when necessary. Most importantly, you would learn to recognize and respond to threats that exist outside normal space-time. That sounds impossible. It is impossible by the definition of possible that you currently understand, Elena agreed. But impossibility is just another boundary, and protectors specialize in crossing boundaries that shouldn't be crossable. Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation in her hands as Elena spoke, as if her body was responding to concepts her mind couldn't yet grasp. Is this real? I mean, am I really sitting here talking to someone who can manipulate the laws of physics, or am I having some kind of breakdown? Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a small, smooth stone. She held it in her open palm, and Sarah watched in fascination as the stone began to glow with soft blue light. This is a fragment of crystallized time, Elena explained. It contains about 30 seconds of duration that I borrowed from a moment when nothing important was happening. Watch what occurs when I release it back into the time stream. Elena closed her fingers around the stone, and when she opened them again, it was gone. Simultaneously, Sarah's alarm clock jumped forward by exactly 30 seconds, the digital display changing from 9:47 to 9 hours 47 minutes and 30 seconds in a single instant. Time is more flexible than people realize, Elena said. Most of the constraints that define your everyday experience are maintained by consensus rather than absolute law. When you understand the deeper rules, you can work with time, space, matter, and energy in ways that ordinary physics considers impossible. Sarah stared at her alarm clock, trying to process what she had just witnessed. You stole 30 seconds from somewhere else and gave them to right now. I borrowed them, Elena corrected. And now they're back where they belong, plus the little bit extra that we used to have this conversation. The universe's books are balanced. This is insane, Sarah said, but she was smiling as she said it. The demonstration had been so far beyond anything she had thought possible that it somehow made everything else easier to accept. Sanity is overrated, Elena replied. Reality is much more interesting than most people dare to imagine. Sarah looked around her dormitory room, seeing it with new eyes. The textbooks that had seemed so important yesterday now looked like children's picture books, simplified explanations of a reality far more complex and wonderful than their authors suspected. If I decided to pursue this, Sarah said, when would I start? You already have, Elena replied. The moment you chose to protect Tommy instead of running away, you took the first step on the path. The moment you decided to pay attention to the signs you've been seeing for the past 3 days, you took the second step. Right now, by asking these questions, instead of trying to convince yourself that none of this is real, you're taking the third step. So I'm already becoming a protector? You're becoming someone who could choose to become a protector, Elena clarified. The actual transformation requires conscious commitment and formal training. But the potential has awakened in you, and that can't be undone. Sarah felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror at this revelation. Her entire future was balanced on the edge of a decision she hadn't even known she would have to make. Continue with her planned life of academic study and medical career, or step into a world of impossible responsibilities and unimaginable abilities. How long do I have to decide? As long as you need, Elena said. But I should mention that the situation is becoming more urgent. The barriers between worlds are weakening, and we need more protectors to help maintain them. What happened with Tommy was just a small example of what occurs when the boundaries break down. There are much larger threats gathering. What kind of larger threats? Elena's expression became grim. Entities that make the hungry ones look like minor inconveniences. Forces that want to reshape this entire dimension according to their own incomprehensible desires. And, worst of all, something that appears to be systematically testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses in ways that suggest intelligence and planning. Sarah felt a chill at Elena's words. You think something is preparing for a coordinated attack? I think something has been preparing for a coordinated attack for a very long time, and we're finally beginning to see the early stages of implementation, which is why we need people like you, Sarah. Fresh perspectives, new approaches, minds that haven't been limited by years of thinking inside the existing paradigms. But I don't know anything about fighting interdimensional entities or maintaining cosmic boundaries. Neither did I when I started, Elena replied. Neither did any of us. The knowledge comes with the transformation, and the wisdom comes with experience. What matters is the willingness to learn, and the courage to stand against forces that would unravel everything. Sarah looked out her dormitory window at the normal world going about its normal business, completely unaware that its continued existence depended on people like Elena standing guard in places between dimensions. Students hurried to classes, professors carried briefcases full of research, maintenance workers tended to the physical infrastructure of the campus. All of it could disappear in an instant if the barriers failed and the wrong entities found their way through. What happens to my family if I become a protector? Sarah asked. My parents, my sister, my friends. What do I tell them? You tell them that you've discovered a calling that requires you to travel frequently and work with classified information, Elena said. It's not technically a lie. You will travel frequently, though not always through normal space. And the information you'll work with is definitely classified, though not by any human government. Will I ever be able to see them again? Of course, Elena assured her. Being a protector doesn't mean cutting yourself off from human relationships. It just means that those relationships become part of what you're fighting to protect. Many of us maintain families and friendships throughout our careers. Careers? How long do protectors typically work? Elena smiled mysteriously. The transformation that creates a protector also extends lifespan considerably. I've been doing this work for 143 years, and I'm considered relatively young among my peers. Sarah's mind reeled at this information. 143 years. But you look like you're in your 30s. I am in my 30s, biologically speaking. The transformation doesn't just extend life. It fundamentally alters how your body relates to time. You age much more slowly, and many of the normal limitations of human physiology no longer apply. So if I became a protector, I could live for centuries. Assuming you survive the dangers of the work, yes. Though I should mention that time becomes a much more flexible concept when you're working with interdimensional phenomena. Sometimes a mission that takes subjective months happens in objective minutes. Sometimes you spend years in between spaces where time flows differently than it does in normal reality. Sarah tried to imagine living for centuries, watching multiple generations of her family grow up and grow old, while she remained essentially unchanged. The idea was both appealing and deeply unsettling. Elena, Sarah said slowly, what would my first assignment be if I chose to join? Your first assignment would be training, Elena replied. Intensive, comprehensive training in everything from basic quantum mechanics to advanced reality manipulation. You'd learn to perceive the underlying structure of existence, to identify different categories of extra-dimensional threats, and to use the tools and abilities that come with the transformation. How long would that training take? About 2 years of subjective time, though as I mentioned, that could correspond to anything from 2 weeks to 20 years in normal temporal flow, depending on where the training takes place. Sarah felt her last connection to her normal life stretching to the breaking point. 2 years of training would mean abandoning her college education entirely, disappointing her parents who had worked so hard to support her academic goals, and giving up the future she had spent so long planning. But it would also mean learning to do things that currently seemed magical, protecting innocent people from threats they couldn't even imagine, and becoming part of something larger and more important than anything she had ever considered possible. "I need to think about this," Sarah said finally. Elena nodded understandingly. "Of course you do. It's the biggest decision you'll ever make, and you should take whatever time you need to consider it properly. But Sarah, I want you to understand something important." "What?" "The universe doesn't make mistakes when it calls someone to become a protector. If you've been marked for this role, it's because reality itself has determined that you have something essential to offer. Trust that judgment, even if you don't fully trust your own." Elena stood up and walked toward the dormitory door, moving with the same fluid grace that Sarah had noticed in the protector she had seen from Tommy's window. "How will I contact you when I've made my decision?" Sarah asked. Elena smiled and placed her hand on the doorknob. "You won't need to contact me. When you're ready to begin training, the opportunity will present itself. The universe is very good at providing what its guardians need, when they need it. And if I decide not to pursue this, then you live a normal human life, with the knowledge that you once had the opportunity to become something extraordinary. There's no shame in making that choice, Sarah. Not everyone is meant to walk the path of the protectors." Elena opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Just before the door closed behind her, she looked back at Sarah one final time. "For what it's worth," Elena said softly, "I hope you choose to join us. The universe is becoming a more dangerous place, and we need people with your particular combination of compassion and courage." The door closed, leaving Sarah alone with the most important decision of her life. Sarah made her decision 3 weeks later while babysitting the Morrison twins. 8-year-old Marcus and his sister Lily had been testing every boundary that evening, refusing to eat dinner, drawing on the walls with markers, and turning bedtime into an epic battle of wills. When both children finally fell asleep at nearly midnight, Sarah collapsed on the Morrison couch, exhausted and questioning every life choice that had led her to this moment. That's when she felt it, the familiar silence that meant reality was holding its breath. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in seconds, and shadows began moving independently of their sources. Sarah stood slowly, recognizing the signs from her experience with Tommy. The twins had pushed bedtime so far past its normal boundaries that something was stirring in the spaces between worlds. But this time, Sarah wasn't afraid. She walked calmly to the window and saw them emerging from the darkness, creatures of living shadow with too many eyes and hunger that radiated like heat. The hungry ones had found another breach, another moment when the rules were broken enough to let them through. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped outside. The creatures paused when they sensed her presence, their multiple eyes focusing on her with predatory interest. One of them, larger than the rest, approached with flowing movements that defied physics. "You protect the dreamers," it spoke without words, its voice echoing directly in Sarah's mind. "But you are not yet transformed. You are vulnerable." Sarah felt power stirring within her, abilities she didn't fully understand but somehow knew how to use. "I don't need to be transformed to stand between you and sleeping children." The creature laughed, a sound like glass breaking in reverse. "Brave little guardian. But bravery without power is merely decoration on failure." Sarah reached deep within herself, finding reserves of strength she never knew existed. Her hands began to glow with soft blue light, the same color she had seen in Elena's demonstration with crystallized time. The hungry ones recoiled slightly, their forms becoming less solid. "I choose this," Sarah said, her voice carrying across dimensions. "I choose to become what's needed." The transformation hit her like lightning made of pure possibility. Her consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of normal human perception, allowing her to see the quantum foundations that supported reality itself. She could perceive the hungry ones not as mysterious shadow creatures, but as living embodiments of entropy seeking to unravel the careful structure of existence. More importantly, she could see exactly how to stop them. Sarah raised her hands and began weaving new rules into local space-time, reinforcing the boundaries that kept different dimensions separate. The hungry ones found themselves unable to maintain coherent form as their connection to their home dimension was severed. One by one, they dissolved back into the nothing between worlds. Elena materialized beside her as the last creature faded. Impressive work for someone with no formal training. The knowledge was already there, Sarah replied, marveling at how natural her new abilities felt. I just needed to stop being afraid of using it. The Morrison twins? Safe and sleeping soundly, they'll wake up tomorrow with no memory of anything unusual. Sarah looked at her hands, which still glowed faintly with residual power. Is this permanent now? The transformation? Completely irreversible, Elena confirmed. You're no longer entirely human, Sarah. You're something more. A guardian standing watch at the edge of reality. Sarah felt a moment of grief for the life she was leaving behind. Her college plans, her family's expectations, her simple human dreams, all of it was gone now, replaced by responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. But as she looked at the Morrison house, where two children slept peacefully, unaware of how close they had come to losing not just their dreams but their very existence, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now you learn everything else, Elena said with a smile. How to travel between dimensions. How to identify threats before they manifest. How to work with a team of protectors scattered across multiple realities. The universe is vast and strange, and there's so much more for you to discover. Sarah nodded, feeling excitement replace her earlier grief. She had found her purpose at last, the calling she had felt since childhood finally given shape and meaning. She was no longer Sarah Chen, the college student. She was Sarah Chen, the protector, guardian of boundaries, defender of sleeping children everywhere. As they walked away from the Morrison house, Elena handed her a small device that looked like a crystalline compass. Your first assignment begins tomorrow. There's a situation developing in Seattle. Children across the city are experiencing shared nightmares that suggest coordinated intervention by entities we haven't encountered before. More dangerous than the hungry ones? Potentially much more dangerous. These entities seem to be trying to establish permanent footholds in our reality by corrupting the dream space where young minds are most vulnerable. Sarah tucked the device into her pocket, already thinking about strategies and approaches. The scared college student who had first encountered Tommy Henderson was gone forever. In her place stood someone ready to face impossible threats with impossible abilities. Elena, Sarah said as they reached the street. Thank you for giving me the choice. For trusting me to make the right decision. Thank you for making it, Elena replied. The universe is a little safer tonight because you chose to become who you were always meant to be. Sarah looked up at the stars, seeing them now not as distant points of light, but as part of the vast cosmic structure she had sworn to protect. Somewhere among those stars, other protectors were standing guard against forces that would unmake everything good and beautiful in existence. She was ready to join them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.